much. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for hopping on the code review weekly workshop. We're going to talk about some code review things. I've got a code review thing. Let me share my screen and we could talk about that thing. So every once in a while, I have to review MRs touching emails. And I had a thought that, oh, I might be able to use the Web IDE to do this one little thing that you have to make sure with new emails. And you totally can, which is really exciting. One of the quirks with the way we do our emails is we have HAML email templates and text ERB email templates. And ideally, these two templates would say the same thing, but in a different format. And so when someone's writing a new email, you want to make sure that these two files are looking the same to the user. And if it's a long email, it's kind of hard to like just even visually if you had two renderings of the same email side by side. But let's just pick an email with us. I'll pick one of the text ones. Let's do like maybe pipeline fix email. No, that one's not interesting at all. Do like relabeled issue email. That was not interesting at all. Man, these are really small emails. Let's do like unknown sign-in. Okay, yeah. So this is the HAML. Looks like the Web IDE isn't rendering HAML or the formatting HAML. That's okay, but I could do on the Web IDE, hit F1 to go to command palette and look for compare active file with, and I can look for the unknown sign-in email HTML HAML. Oh, how interesting. Normally we have text ERBs, but this one is text HAML. I don't know if that's going to be an issue at all, but
if you're looking for syntax highlighting, it is set to UTF-8 down in the bottom right. So changing this to HAML should probably fix it.
Cool. All right. So this is interesting. The HTML one looks a lot beefier than the other one. Let's see. Yeah, this says plain text. Let's see if there's a HAML. No, it looks like it doesn't know how to do HAML. That's a to-do. But yeah, look over here on the right-hand side is all this table markup. Okay. What I could do is here we're saying hi username, but I can see clearly just comparing these two files. Oh yeah, these aren't the same. This is a much starker difference than when I was hoping to find one. Let's see if, so like if I was going to look at these two, I see a lot. Some of these are the same. You see like here, this bit, it determined this sentence is the same on both the text and the non-text. I'm going to go ahead and push this all the way to the right, and then I'll move this over to see if this one is the same or not. And yeah, you can see some slight differences. One is like when we insert links in the text, we just do the link directly. We can't, because we're not doing anchor tags, we don't get to wrap it in something like change your password. But basically what I do when I want to tell if two things are kind of the same is I'll start diffing them, but then I'll just start changing one of them to look like the other one and see if the changes make sense. So it's like here, we're saying, hey, do we change, like, do we seem like the password? And I just keep writing to the file. It's like, okay, yeah, so these are pretty much the same. Here, I want to see if this sentence is the same-ish. And yeah, so this sentence is pretty much the same. Looks like there's a lot more information that we're including. And so if I was reviewing this, if this was a new email, I would say, hey, how come we're not including host name and all this other information? in the text version of the email. And I think that would be something that we'd want to do. More often than not, the differences will look a little more similar like this. And so if I was going to compare active file with this one, yeah, so I'll just start removing things to see if they kind of look the same. So it's like, hello, name, waiting to see if these things are kind of the same. Yeah, that one's the same. And then I start removing things, seeing if these things are the same. Yeah, here we're have to make this a whole link to. Yeah, there we go. These things are probably the same. If this is a brand new, yeah, if this was a brand new email, I would also be able to tell, since we're translating these things, by looking at the changes of the pot file, I could tell if there's extra sentences that look like they're slightly worded differently or something like that. So yeah, I was just gonna share. I was pleasantly surprised that the Web IDE out of the box, because we're using open source VS Code, has these cool features like compare active file with. So you can actually compare the files with each other pretty nicely in the Web IDE, which can be nice when two files kind of have to look alike. So that's what I wanted to share. You know, I'm also trying to advertise the Web IDE. That's part of it too.
I'm actually curious that because I've never seen an email MR. Are those considered front end? Because they're HAML, which I feel like HAML is often asked for a backend reviewer, but I've never seen one, so I wasn't sure.
I think they're in the both category, because I think
Okay.
HAML technically is in the both category. So it's kind of left up to discretion of how backendy the HAML is.
Okay.
Yeah, the email MRs could be challenging because
Yeah, I don't even know how to test one. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I would want to test it. I feel like if I'm reviewing it, I would want to see it visually for the non-text one. Because I feel like the text one, like you can probably just test that pretty easily, or at least like visualize what it's going to look like. But from what I remember, email CSS is not great. Like to getting an email looking right is not like a great experience.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's why it's formatted like that one we looked is it's all tables, and you know, get really
Tables are awesome.
Yeah. So
Coming from a back-end engineer, tables make sense in my brain. But no, I remember I had to do emails at previous jobs, and I just remember like hating to have to go in there and touch things because you have to test it in different email clients, and how do you know it looks nice? And
yeah.
it is front end, really. I mean, it's visually something that someone's looking at, but they're HAML files, so it's always a nice, interesting both area review. Watch me get one assigned to me because I said that. It's like,
Yeah, I think it's definitely though like an odd thing for even fronters to look at. Like it's there's little quirks there that aren't obvious that you gotta keep an eye on. What were you gonna say, Yannick?
I was just to mention that testing it in our application is actually pretty straightforward. I don't remember it from the top of my head, but there's like a route in our Ruby app or web app that allows you to render all the emails that we do have available, like in the GDK, like in a testing purpose. So that's the good thing. The bad thing about it, as you just mentioned, it will render in your browser. So that is from the email MRs that I've seen. That is how far I took the testing. Still Outlook might to screw up everything. We're not pretty much not so safe about the on that side.
Yeah, there's two things you can use to test the emails, and it rendering on the browser isn't that bad, but it's yeah, there's quirks that the browser clearly can handle, which email clients can't. I say it's not that bad because we have like a preprocessor that gets rid of all CSS classes and stuff and like inlines the styles of the things. So we have a preprocessor to emails that get sent out. to make them email client friendly. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always email client friendly. The two ways of testing them is, yes, there's like the mail previewer. And so hopefully when a new email is written, we can add this to our big list of email previews. But that doesn't always happen. The other thing you can use to test emails is there's a route called letter opener. And if you open this route, any email that the application is actually sending will go into this letter opener thing. And so it's like you have this on a tab, and I'm doing something else on a different tab. An email would technically be sent. I'll just keep refreshing the letter opener for like a minute. It'll show up the email that was actually sent to a fictional user or whatever. So it's the letter opener. If you look up in our docs, Google site docs.gitlab.com letter opener, you'll probably see it.
Bonus question on this. We do have a browser matrix of browsers that we support, like everybody who is sane on the web does have. Do we actually have a list of email clients that we support?
I think so.
I haven't seen anything as well, but I'd be sure that you would, if you would come along with like a 5-year-old email client, you probably wouldn't have the greatest experience.
Yeah, it feels like not too long ago, but I guess maybe it's like a year plus. We updated that preprocessor of the emails significantly, and emails became a lot more styled when our GitLab styles. I don't know if you ever noticed this change happen. But there was a number of issues that happened in the fringe email clients, and I think the goal was just to kind of keep supporting whatever we supported before. But there were some issues that were very challenging because the user configuration was just difficult to anticipate. I say that because maybe it's not a bad idea to just be explicit with like, hey, if you're receiving emails, these are the clients that our emails render the best with, and make sure you don't have these things. Like all of that documentation sounds helpful. Yeah, I could usually think of really helpful documentation in my head, but unfortunately, sometimes that's where it stops. It's like whenever I feel like maybe I should write it, that's when the blockers in my brain is like, nah, maybe I'm not gonna write it. Cool. Yeah. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share or add, or any interesting code reviews that happened this week? Okay. Well, are there any code reviews that you all would like to pair on that you all have assigned to you?
I will, I don't have a code review, but I was trying to think, you actually got assigned an MR that we talked about the week prior. I did want to do a circle back and discuss that very briefly. I was trying to find the MR.
Yeah.
I think it didn't get merged, and I sent it off to someone else because I just did the initial backend review. I'll see if I can find the link or very quickly while I'm talking about this, but there was a community contribution MR that I was asked to review that was huge. And I have the link, so let me put it in here. And it was changing over from using this a field called emails disabled to emails enabled. In both this group and project context, it was a huge MR with a ton of backend changes, I think some database changes, some front end changes. And I think, Paul, the question that I wanted to circle back on, you asked me, why were they going through the process of changing everything from the front end wording of emails enabled, disabled to the database, when it might be better to maybe just change what the front end says and just kind of like not everything on the back end or something like
Oh.
that. I did go through and do the due diligence of looking into that when I reviewed the MR, and there was a really long thread discussion between, I think, GitLab team members at some point where that was discussed and the decision was made to like do this version of the change. So I did go look it up. And yeah, I guess I wanted to say thank you for asking that question, because it didn't even it really even occur to me just to make the change on the front end. But I did go look it up and find like a pretty long thread discussion with quite a few folks about like why they wanted to get everything done from the front to the back. And I think it was like it could cause a lot of confusion going forward, and they wanted everything to kind of be the same. I felt like the MR was like very confusing to review.
Yeah.
And every time I reviewed it, I feel bad. I kept like finding new things where I'm like, I just didn't see this before, but that's because there's so many things to look at. So I don't know how you got it by accident, but someone gave it to you, and I was like, well, sorry, at least you've seen this before.
Yeah, it's an interesting MR. Do you want to share your screen and we can look at it together? It looks like I
Yeah,
need
we
to
can.
do it.
I sent it on to a backend maintainer, and hopefully they're not super upset with me sending it to them because
Okay.
it's gigantic. It was like double the size, and so at least I got it split up from what it was.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Oh, you want to share your screen? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, okay, and I don't mind sharing. I was just trying to get. I'm
Okay.
working on changing my desktop, my
Oh,
monitor configuration, so things are a little off right now. But
Okay.
so
Like-
just to give the high level, I can show maybe the picture before and after, and that might be like a clear.
Yep.
This is the biggest part of the change, is they're changing from this disable email notification to it being like enabled. The wording enable, and also it like floats all the way down to the database. The database field has been backfilled from the previous field. I think this MR is introducing like an ignore for the old field, and they'll go through the migration process to remove it, whatever the rules are for the database, because there's rules that I don't remember them off the top of my head. But yeah, it was a lot of changes, and it was very confusing to review. I don't think there was actually a ton of like view code changed.
No.
So maybe that was easy for you to review. I found that some of this was so hard. And then tests failed in weird spots. That was something I was like, I worked with them for weeks trying to get the tests passing. It was really hard to figure out what was causing all of the problems. Some of them were like N+1s got introduced.
Yeah.
I think as part of this change also, I think the email setting moved from the project record to the project setting record. There was some weirdness
I
there.
saw something like that, and that was that
Like
was more concerning things that I saw.
yeah, it's the whole thing is very confusing. Like the code, the way it was, I felt like was very odd, because I feel like this is part of our interview for backend. There's like questions that like they're like, this is an odd way to do this, we shouldn't do this, and then we have it in our code base. And so I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to make this recording private now, because I said that.
No, I think
Sorry,
it's fine.
cut it out.
Oh, is there something?
I don't know. There's something about like not overriding database columns. It's
Well,
just a
it's not like-
strange thing to do if you're like have a database column that you run this like super or like do something else, because it's kind of like if you disable, the old way was if you disable in the namespace, it overrides the project setting. This main change was to use this emails enabled instead in this disabled method. And this was the code I think that they were using to populate the new column and project setting, but that's gone now because it's taken care of as part of these changes, and they have a delegator. The whole thing is just the delegate stuff I think is pretty normal. It's just
Well, it's a lot for like a small visual thing. That's
yes.
I think you can't get past Like,
Yes, we
this
also
is-
ran into like, they removed stuff from the API and I was like, oh, I don't think you can do that. You're just gonna have to leave it and mark it as deprecated. And you
yeah,
can add the new one, but you can't remove the old one. I don't think you can ever remove fields from the API. Am I wrong?
no, you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there might be third parties using it
Yeah.
that we don't control. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, and then, that was, they were like, but this is what this MR is doing. And I'm like, well, yes, it is in most of the areas, but for the API is special, like you have to leave the old one. And then you can add the new one and then hopefully people will just use that. But for the API, it's like, I don't even think from the documentation, it was pretty clear, you cannot introduce like, it's an exception to get a removal of a field from the API response.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Like,
So
that's a pretty hard rule that we have.
even in the major releases, you're not supposed to remove things.
Yeah, I think
So
market deprecated, and then the major release is when it could be removed or something.
I
But
don't even think so. I don't know. I feel like, I don't think even in the major release for API only.
for the only really, oh, okay.
I'm gonna
That,
look.
I thought that was one of the reasons why we had the major release, but maybe not. I
I'm gonna look because it is something that I like actually waffled back and forth on. I see all these
yeah. But
millions of comments.
I mean, I would say like a lot of the challenge here is when there's this UX confusion and it's like, oh, okay, we can change how we want to present this, but how we want to present it causes some discontinuity to what it actually is in the backend.
Yeah.
Like there's two ways you can approach changing the thing. You can change it at its root, which would be the database field, and then propagate from there. Or we can just repolish it to make it look like the UX.
Yeah.
Just solve that. Not saying that we're ignoring the root, we can keep going. Like we can go from the
Yeah.
front to the back. But because of just how
In smaller chunks.
how old the code is, you're
Yeah.
gonna do one big sweeping change if you change it from the root first.
Mm.
And could be really challenging.
And I think that is the path that was taken. I actually worked with this contributor for the database migrations that backfilled things. It took months
Yeah.
for the backfills to complete. And I didn't understand why, because I didn't really pay attention to the names of the migrations. I was just like, oh, okay, this thing's taken a while. I guess it's big. And what it was doing was backfilling emails enabled for like all projects and all namespaces.
Yeah.
And you even asked about that, and I was like, oh yeah, that did take a really long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I have set a reminder on my calendar every Friday to go look at their backfill migrations and check on them because they weren't finishing anytime soon.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think I know that approach that was agreed upon is
Mhm.
it's a risky, non-iterative way of doing it.
Oh, I still don't feel 100% about this MR.
Yeah.
Like I'm bored. That's why even though I am a maintainer, I only did the initial review and I really want someone else to look at it as another set of eyes. Maintainer or not, there are still some times when the MRs are like, I want someone else to look at this.
Yeah. Do you happen to have that original thread where it's decided, yeah, we're going to change all the fields?
Okay, I'll see if I can find it off screen and yeah.
Okay.
It's somewhere in here, I think.
Okay.
Some digging, but I did find it.
Yeah. If you want to switch screens, I'm supposed to review this so we can pair.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, it looks like I am supposed to.
Okay, you can definitely
Okay.
when I find the thread.
Yeah, let's try. Okay, I totally forgot what I said about this MR. So let's see what happened. Oh man, Nicholas is already dropping things on. What did I say about this? Oh yeah, so there's a really interesting behavior here with these settings. So let's go up to see the screenshot to get the context.
It looks to me in the screenshot that like one checkbox was removed and the other checkbox was added.
Right. So these are the overall context. This is a Rails form. Nothing is Ajax submitted. Do we even say Ajax anymore? I don't know. This is a Rails form where you have all the toggles, but then at the bottom you have these checkboxes of for your projects. This is in the project settings. So checkboxes are interesting. I kind of learned something because let me go up to the original comment here. Deepika left a really good question because we have two inputs here so that we can look at the diff pretty well. Let me go ahead and open up. Let's go. Let me open this up. Oh, okay. Oh man, why are you taking so long to download? What's going on? What was that? What was that? And then nothing actually applied?
I found
Oh,
the
I'm not,
thread.
I'm in the GitLab development kit. Okay. All right. Okay. So looking at the changes here, we're not calling it emails disabled, we're calling it emails enabled. But one of the weird things is we have a hidden input and we have a form checkbox. So this technically renders two inputs for this value. We have a hidden input and we have an input checkbox.
So what is the hidden input? I guess, what are hidden inputs used for typically at GitLab?
So that's a good
Is
question.
there like, yeah, I don't know.
So we would use a hidden input when Rails needs to own the form submission. So we're not creating like a Ajax request. I know Ajax isn't the right word, but that's the word that's coming to mind.
Oh, so like not, oh wait, no, it's view, but I guess, oh,
Yeah, so you see the name of the input is very
yeah,
Rails model-y.
yeah.
The reason we need a hidden input, this is a weird quirk with checkboxes. If the value of the checkbox is false, HTML won't include it in the form submission. So what that means is if I'm saying, oh, I want to disable this setting and I hit submit and I don't have this hidden input, the backend is
Rails just doesn't get it.
exactly. So nothing actually.
Oh.
So that the value is actually included, we have a hidden input. And there's a couple of other checkboxes that do this very similar pattern thing. So yeah, like here's a hidden input for this thing. Here's a hidden input for this thing. So like it's pretty straightforward. But the one thing I said is like, okay, if we have a hidden input with the name, this checkbox doesn't need a name. I see that it looks like we're doing that below here, but it's like the checkbox is just the presentation for the hidden input. And
So I feel like this is another case of like what I typically do in a code base where I'm not 100% sure how something is done, and I'll go look and see how it's done in the file or elsewhere and copy it and change what I need to change. And
yeah,
at this point, would you, and I didn't look at what you suggested because I have like 400 emails to read, but would you suggest that they fix everything up in this file to like help avoid or
That's a
not,
good
or like maybe do a follow-up, or because I'm like, do you want to make the MR bigger? Like,
Yeah,
no.
that's a good question. Judging it by the state of the MR and the fatigue of the MR right now, I would say no. Like we're not fixing anything else with this.
Yeah.
But
There's been 96 discussion
right.
threads.
But we're not going to continue to add to the
Okay.
pattern that doesn't make sense. And maybe that makes things a little, I don't know, maybe that makes things strange for future readers of why does this not have a name? Why does this have a name? Hopefully it just makes it obvious that the name isn't important. And it shouldn't have.
Well, yeah, at least it will be different because I feel like when you add something that's in a pattern that is like not a less desirable pattern, it just makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The other thing I see as a front ender when I looked at this is I saw there's no unit test update or change to unit, and there's no unit test update. So
Yeah.
what were we gonna say, Yannick?
Before you move on to the test, just a quick question of understanding on this. Apologies if you said
you're
this
fine.
before, but I get the hidden input part, and I get what you said regarding the Ajax endpoint and all of these. But what we're seeing here is like, are we firing a form submit from a new component? Is that what we're doing? Because like, just from my gut feeling, that would be the perfectly right thing to do from a Haml template, as if in like old proper DOM land, but here in VDOM land, that seems odd. And also,
Yeah.
what are we doing when this is done? Like page reload, or what is happening here?
That's a good question. So I without diving into the code, I have fairly high certainty this is what's going on. View itself is not like doing the form submission. It's just building the form. So we definitely have a submit button, and that's what tells HTML form, oh, we're going to do the full HTML form submit, which means yes, page reload, all that good stuff. So like this is most likely originated as a Haml thing, but then required a lot more because we have a lot of components like these project feature settings, which are more, I don't know. They're a little, there's a lot more involved inputs than just whatever we could manage.
Yeah.
So we're building the form fields and view, but it's a vanilla HTML form at the end of the day.
Yeah, interesting. Like, let's not dive too deep on this, but I've never run into this in our code base so far, like with a weird mix between the two approaches yet. And yeah, I would have a lot of questions. It feels a little weird. But okay, let's move on to the tests. Thanks for clarifying this.
I've written one of these. Like so if I've done more than run into it. I know that I've added a view for.
What was the reason?
So, and I would think that the reason has to do with the there's a lot of legacy code. It's not necessarily technical debt, but a lot of legacy code with the way the controller receives this input. It's like it's not ready for an API Ajax submission, but it's expected. This is a form submission. The controller has all these rules to it, so we have to do that form submission thing. And it's part of it is just leaning into the pre-existing behavior. So for my purpose was, it's like there's already a Rails form, but now we need something really advanced. So when I implemented the approval rules, like when you're editing the approval rules for an MR, it's editing an MR is already a Rails form. So there is no, like, we can't Ajax submit just part of the form. We could have rewritten the whole thing to try to Rails form, but it's so large that it's like, no, that's out of scope.
Yeah, so we're mocking a form basically out of our view.
Yeah, so I mean that's something to think about. I think in the from the broader front end perspective is like, do vanilla form submissions have a place? Like, do we like them? And maybe we don't, and maybe we should, maybe we should view that as technical debt. This definitely becomes more challenging, like when errors happen, like all of that, that whole cycle of I submitted something, we're gonna reload the whole page, but there were errors, so they show up at the, that's not fun. So yeah, probably don't like HTML form submissions, and maybe we should, view those as
Yeah.
that.
Do we get away without a page reload on those mocked forms?
Do you mean like this kind of one?
Yeah.
No, we'll do the whole page reload because it's the HTML form.
Okay. Wild. Well, okay. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. Today I learned.
Sorry, Yannick. I know. The only other thing I was going to say about this is, so this is really, really small. One thing that's interesting is like here we have these JS classes and, but that's pre-existing, but it's being used in these feature specs. And the feature specs is what I observed to tell that, what was I thinking? Oh, is this one for a group? Why is
It shouldn't be. Shouldn't
know.
be.
But wait,
I think that's for project.
it
I
should
see
say
the spec
project.
is in features projects.
But look, what's this? Expect safe permission group? What does that mean?
I don't know.
Age within sharing
Oh,
permissions. Oh,
maybe that was left as a copy paste from something else.
to
It
change,
should be for project. Maybe
update.
the naming is just odd.
Yeah.
I know that there was this MR originally contained group and project together, and I think it had like 60 files changed, and I
Yeah.
cried a little and asked them if they could split it by group and project changes separately. So maybe that was left in, or maybe it was there before from the
Yeah.
previous.
The
But it might be not a bad idea to suggest it as a non-blocking change, or maybe, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the specs are hard enough to read as it is. Having things like say the right things for me is helpful to make
Yeah.
sure that I understand what the spec is doing. And so like, while I want to almost make it a non-blocking, because there has been a lot of back and forth, I'm like, maybe just fix it.
yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. No, what I was gonna say is like, so whenever we change a unit, but there's no corresponding change to the unit test. And like this is clearly kind of more than a pure refactor. We're changing the name of something and even the text that we're rendering. So it's like I kind of expected to see a unit test change.
Mhm.
But I think when I dived into the unit test, it's not going to this level. So I was a little concerned,
Oh,
but then I could see that, okay, but we have like multiple feature specs covering this. And so if there wasn't already a lot of fatigue on the MR, I would ask like, hey, can we just add, a test missing unit test coverage for this thing? But technically there's not a lot of conditional logic going on either here. So the most important thing that goes on here is, does it all work in integration? So for me, it's like, okay, the feature spec coverage is there, and that's kind of the most important bit. And ideally, we can push as much feature spec coverage down to the unit. But in this situation, I was like, all right, the coverage is already there, so it's kind of fine. I don't know. What do you all think? Yannick is hearing. This is the second time I've said, it's okay, we're not testing this thing.
I would think that it might be a nice thing to leave the comment, make it non-blocking, open up a follow-up, add like the help needed or whatever the community contribution tag on it is. Because if it's small enough to like add a feature spec, it is going to be more work on you as the reviewer to like write that up in a way that someone could pick it up. But since it seems like it's such a small change, it might, And if
Yeah.
you're so inclined, I don't go on the Discord, but like could be something that could be thrown into Discord to be like, hey, I know there's a hackathon that was going on or is going on. Maybe that's already over.
Yeah, so like what's interesting is, so there is a unit test just for, and this is, I'd love to hear your thoughts, James and Yannick being in the front end, like how you feel about this. So there is unit tests for find email settings exists or not exists. So like here you see there's an if. So we're just basically testing that this if thing is there. The thing that's not being tested at the unit level is like, oh, I can click this checkbox and it updates the hidden input. You know what I mean? That's tested at the feature level technically, but there's some more behavior here that's like, I can add a
Yeah.
bug. I can add, to me, it's like if I can change the unit such that it has bugs in it and the unit tests still pass, our unit tests aren't strong enough.
Where is the, so we're dealing with a hidden input and a GL form checkbox, which are connected to each other. Where is the logic that actually connects these two? Because that is what I would test. Like this doesn't just
Well, so,
model. Okay.
so that's a good question. I mean, the logic is just view reactivity of like, this is a data, you know, and
How many times do we do this in this file?
we
Many
do it
times?
for times. Yeah. So it's like, I feel like there's some sort of way that we could write our tests to like,
It might be a weird approach, given that we're using like view board tools, but could we isolate this logic? No, we really can't, can we? With the view model
probably,
thingy.
you know, hey, how come we don't have this as like as a reusable component thing? Like that might be cool.
Yep.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking about like a helper function or something, but a component would actually be way nicer.
Yeah.
Make this a component and then write one test for it, which actually checks if like it would then be getting the model as props or whatever it be, and then check that the correct model is set.
Yeah.
So that would also fail in case we remove it.
That's an interesting idea. A GL form checkbox with hidden input component. I love it.
I could see this being used quite a bit, like not only in this file.
Yeah, you could do something like this. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we call it. That'd be great. GL form checkbox with hidden input.
But you, yeah, that might be a valuable solution. But to answer your question, I'm pretty convinced that we should come up with a test to cover this. Even though the logic is kind of trivial at this point, I feel like this is something, if it breaks, we would wanna be aware of. And yeah,
Yes.
a feature test is great, but feature test also changes, and that's kind of okay. So
Right.
therefore,
Is
Yeah.
the question like, is the question, should you push back on this MR and make sure we add tests, or is it like, should we create another issue to add tests? Like, are we questioning if the tests need to be done at all, or just if they need to be done in this MR?
And I think that's a great question. I like Yannick's point that, hey, we should. I think I'm not inclined to block the current MR by saying, hey, let's add more pattern breaking changes to the tests, because the tests aren't currently like supporting this kind of thing. So especially given the larger focus and fatigue on the MR and the fact it already has feature spec coverage. If it didn't have feature spec coverage, it's like, we gotta test. So to me, it's like, it's a follow-up. The task of pushing tests down the pyramid is the pre-existing tests down the pyramid just feels like a follow-up for me. But I love your idea of like, yeah, let's have a component for this, and that'll make the test really easy. We just have to see, hey, did we render this form check with hidden input component with this name? Like, that sounds really great. I like I like all those ideas. And I think it's worth mentioning in the MR and the non-blocking comment so the contributor and other people can just be aware of like, hey, here's how we can improve things if we're still touching things and future iterations. Do we want to create a follow-up issue for this and that kind of thing? It's a good idea.
Plus, I agree with everything you just said. Plus, maybe leave a comment on the feature spec and link the issue like, hey, it's absolutely okay to change this file, but this is not covered on a unit-based level. So when you're thinking about about changing this, please make sure that this issue linked in here is hopefully resolved by now.
Yeah, yeah, I think I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's interesting. Like leaving a comment, an actual inline code comment. That's an interesting point.
On the feature spec.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the interesting layer of the code when it comes to testing, because like the most important thing here, well, obviously it's all super important, but like if the name was different, all of it doesn't work. Like one of the things that really matters here is that this name of the input matches what the Rails controller expects. So it's hard to test that without it somehow being an integration. So it's like that feature spec coverage is so important for this kind of thing. So it's like I wouldn't ever recommend, oh, we should remove the feature specs for this thing. But then it's like, okay, we have a whole bunch of names. Like, are we really going to do this name integration changing thing for all of them? It goes back to like, where do these names come from? Could we somehow not hard code the names? Those are all interesting things to consider. Yeah, when I saw I was assigned to this MR, I thought of you, Terry, because I was like, oh, this is it.
No, it wasn't me.
And then when I saw
You just were luck of the draw for someone else.
I know. And when I saw the amount of backend changes to front end changes, I was like, yep, that's what will happen if we started from the database.
Yes, and I did find the thread because your exact comment was almost brought up in that thread, like almost in the exact same, for the same reasons that you've described. And then there was reasons given back about why we want to go this route. And so that's, but it might be an interesting read through. Like,
Yeah, can you link the thread
I did, it's in the document. And
yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to reply to it and just highlighting, like, look at the size of this MR, touching code that's been around for a long time. This is a risky way of doing it.
Yeah, I think maybe what would have been good, and I didn't read through the entire thread all the way. If I did, I don't remember, because I just feel like the last few weeks have been like really just, there's a lot going on. It might have been to lay out a different implementation plan about how to approach this, knowing that someone from the community is going to be working on it, to say like, if we want to go this route, then we can chunk it up like this to make it less of a burden on them. Because I really feel like, I mean, this person has been through the gamut, and it's not just this MR. The MR, there's been like multiple MRs previous to this, which have been like long running threads, you know, they're not mergeable because the migrations aren't done. That finally gets merged, and then they now have a second MR after this one, which is going to change the group settings over. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you do leave that comment, do you think that when they do the group settings, it's possible to chunk it up smaller, or is
Yeah,
that like a wild
well, yeah, if we're
idea?
doing the same thing for group settings, yes, let's try to do it
Yeah.
in a different way. And I think that's
Okay.
the point, is we can end up in the same place. So it's not saying, the point isn't the desired end state. The point is how we get there. And I think if you do it from the front end heading back, it's safer.
Yeah.
than from the root heading forward where you have to change everything.
Yeah, if we could chunk, if you have any suggestions about how to chunk up the next one, I think like if you can get that into like words that like,
Yeah, that's
I don't know.
a good question.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm just
I'll look
like,
at
I
that.
almost like want to be like, this can be done different, but sometimes I really struggle with, do I go down the path of like trying to like mash like a suggestion onto someone? Or just like at least put the question out there to see if that like, you know, I feel like for this, I almost want to be like, this is a better route.
Yeah,
And in some other cases, I'm more like, I just want to like push the creativity button on someone and let them come up with a solution versus like trying to go through the, like, doing all of the work. But for
Yeah.
the, yeah, I don't know.
the what was I gonna say?
If you do put a thread on that, would you
Yeah.
mind tagging, like
Yeah, yeah,
CCing me on it so I can
Sure.
get a notification?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, another interesting case too, where well, I think one thing that's relevant here is you see an MR and you see the approach and you're like, oh, wow, like this is a risky approach to making all these changes. I wish we weren't doing it this approach, but we've already made the database migration. So it's like, we're already committed down this path. So number of times I've reviewed an MR, there's I would say maybe a quarter of the time I'll see an approach that isn't favorable and I'll be able to say something. I'm saying, hey, let's not go down this path. A lot of times I come to an MR and, oh, we've already been on this path for a couple of months. It's like, all right, well, we have to just make the best of the path we're on. And then hopefully the thing to then decide then is, well, let me go back to wherever we decided to go down this path and try to communicate some lessons learned so that we can see the risks down the road with something like this.
Yeah, based on the discussion thread, it seems like we got here from a lessons learned from a previous issue is what I gathered from that. But perhaps the step further would have been to like say, okay, this is the end state we want. How can we get this?
Yeah.
How can we get there in smaller chunks to avoid monster MR risky change? Okay.
Yeah.
I like really appreciate the perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to do that. None of this is like the contributor that's like shepherded this like across. It's been, you know, super great and thoughtful, and has been a small change, but because of the way that we decided to do it. See, James has been really involved, and so I think like the contributor has been fantastic. It's just I wish we had a better iteration plan from the beginning. But all right, well, thanks for bringing it up and talking about it. Appreciate it, Terry and Yannick. Thanks for taking some time. I'll catch you all next time. Bye.